And today we are talking about insider threat. And if you get nothing else out of this channel, understand that everyone around you is out to get you. There's no love in this world. People are the worst. And I think that's it. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Nope, that's the end of the stream.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Just remember that all STDs are insider threats.
And that is how we become demonetized in the first 30 seconds.
Fantastic.
And that is the clip for today. If you're just if you're just joining us, thank you for joining us on this Saturday morning as we talk about insider threats. And it's an interesting topic because we started talking about it last week, and it was weird because Gowrie said something which I had never thought about, is sometimes insider threats are like preventable, like whether it's through like salary, you're paying your people enough, which I never really thought of that way before, which is weird. And then there's also like different categories of insider threats, like whether it's accidental, whether it's purposeful, whether they're being manipulated. Like it was kind of interesting. And then we got down this whole weird realm of why insider threats are some of the most terrifying type of attacks. And then we just started accusing everyone of being an imposter. And that's kind of where it devolved into in the last 30 seconds of stream. Anything else we need to like kind of like we'll set the stage for?
So when it comes to insider threats, it can very easily be somebody who's accidentally doing it, or it could be malicious, right? So and assuming that one of the things that when we talk about insider threats, a lot of people don't have any flags or things inside of, we'll say, network, their organization, to see if people are touching things that they shouldn't be, right? So having those, I'm sure we'll get into that, but yeah.
Yeah, you brought up a cool point, which was a whole nother thing when I was at one of the enterprises I was working at, was the idea to catch a lot of this was looking at flow. And this goes into like incident response, which is not my strong suit, but going like, okay, this server always is sending data to this server. Like the moment it deviates from its standard operating procedure, we should raise a flag. Like that technology, or things like we're going to tag all the files. So if that file ever moves from this server to this server, like a digital rights management, we're going to flag it. Like some of that technology becomes really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to talk about like detecting them in terms of network activity, we used to call it anomaly detection because it's not necessarily an indication of something bad. It's just something weird has happened, and you may assess that, look at it, and say that's normal, and then not flag it in the future, or change rules or whatever. But one of the examples is like on a ship in the Navy. For the most part, anything connecting to the network on a ship should probably be government equipment, right? In theory, right? So there should be known MAC addresses and known IP addresses. And, the moment an IP address leaves the ship or connects to, the thing, connects to the network in a way that's not pre-recorded, that should just be a flag, right? So like port security should be normal. Port security is a way of detecting, insider threats, connecting things to your, endpoint connections.
Well, this was kind of a weird one when it came down to Log4j. Was one of the biggest offenses coming out of the gate where a bunch of companies weren't vulnerable was outbound protections. Like your normal servers under like a normal case, your servers don't need to connect out to the internet outside of like patches or like typical updates. There's no reason they should be reaching out to the internet and doing like web browsing and things like that. So like some of the best protections that people had in place right off the bat was outbound protections. Gula, what were you going to say?
When you design and build firewalls, if you're only building inbound rules, you're only building half of your protections. As far as insider threats go, I might have a slightly different take on it. When I'm the insider threat, there's kind of two paths that I take. It's the plausible deniability of I was just being an idiot, or there's no group of my peers that will ever convict me because the company deserved what they got. So it's, do I do it on purpose, or was it kind of just I screwed up?
Yeah, this is probably a good segue right here. As I'm getting messages and I'm just trying to. Excellent. Okay. Wanted to make sure the audio levels were right. This is an interesting concept though when it comes to an insider threat. Like let's talk about why is an insider threat, like why is an imposter so scary? Like why is that more terrifying than like some of the other vulnerabilities that could exist in your network?
Because if you don't know exactly where they're going to go, right? That's part of the issue, to where if they have inside access and you don't have any of those flags or alarms to go off when they go to access different systems or access an area they shouldn't. Have you ever done a threat model to find out how much damage could actually be done? Do you know where your important information is at that's business critical? And having somebody have unfettered access to that could be a major issue. Whether it's, hey, you need to have that uptime, and they have the ability to go turn off the panels, or if they have the ability to go into the networking closet and then plug in some type of sniffing device in line. What is the damage?
So here's the thing, like everyone likes to think of insider threats as, paid spies that go plug things into your network and steal data. Those types of insider threat are like the rarest form. Now, they're the most dangerous form because there are often people with some form of trust that has access to things. But they're often the rarest form because, for the most part, people trying to get that stuff can get it without putting a human in the loop. They can just get so you guys. So for people who don't go to DEF CON, the best form of insider threat that they showcase every single year is at the cold calling.
Social engineering CTF.
Yeah, the social engineering CTF, right? Where they cold call companies and they effectively live with an audience record a conversation where someone cold calls and turns someone on the other side of the line into an insider threat, an unwitting insider threat, right? Where you're getting them to disclose information that they're not supposed to, or you're getting them to give you authorization to, talk to people or interact with things that you're not supposed to have. That is a form of insider threat, an unwitting insider threat. And so that's why it's like everyone here is an imposter. That's because everyone here, can be an insider threat, even if you're not witting.
Well, this was kind of a funny one recently. Was I had to go get into my parents' house, and had to be quick and things like that. But I was laughing because I'm like, oh, I'll go over, I'll pick the door, I'll go do this. And then I realized, I'm like, you know what? They gave a key to the neighbors. And this was like a whole story why I didn't have one and things like that. But I walked up to the neighbors and I was like, hey, I'm the son. I'm looking for the key, just be able to get in and turn off the water. And they're like, oh yeah, let me go grab it for you. And as I had the key and I was walking over to the house, it hit me. I'm like, there was zero validation they just did to confirm I wasn't just a total stranger. And it hits me as like, one, that's terrifying. They did not get the key back because it's now my key after I made a few more duplicates. But my point is like, that's terrifying. And I think that's often things like companies are now transitioning a little bit to like, let's not trust anyone. Let's assume, like kind of going back to the intro, let's just assume everyone is the worst and everyone can be susceptible to this. I think the other piece which makes that first individual, you said it is the rarest, where it's like an actual insider threat looking for like to do something malicious. The reason why that is so terrifying to me, at least, is like when we do penetration testing, when we do massive penetration testing on these huge enterprises, you get dropped into a network which has 500,000 endpoints, 1 million endpoints. And this is like one of those weird things most people don't think about when you have like a sophisticated hacker in your network. They don't know where the keys to the kingdom are. Like they don't know where the critical data is. It might take months to find like what the important data is outside of like source code or accounting data. Like the big pieces of data in your company might be hidden somewhere just like because it's so big, where an insider with good knowledge of that information knows exactly where all the bodies are.
So as far as insider threats, like accidental insider threats go, I mean, I've compromised different businesses just walking around and dropping CDs in a parking lot. And nowadays it would be a USB stick. You just walk around like a defunct fairy and toss USB sticks into the air as you're walking through. And I guarantee there's going to be at least 3 people for every 10 USB sticks you drop that will plug those into their work computer when they get into the office.
Squiddy brings up a really good point is, you know yourself. I'm going to flick this over and I'll throw it back up. There we go. You know yourself, you know what you can do, so you're paranoid at the level of threat. An old lady on the network doesn't worry about insider threat because she doesn't know, she doesn't think she can't do anything. Like that is a really good point when you think about it, is like, yeah, we're on that level of paranoia, but the general population, your general employees, don't really think like, oh, I can have access to things that I really shouldn't have access to, and I am a vulnerability.
That's where training comes in. A lot of the certifications and stuff that you have to go through, those checkboxes, is you have to train people. And I talk about, when I do security stuff for companies, I talk about training all the time for security things, yet I never train anyone other than the admins. I'm like, hey, you need to go tell your people not to screw up. They're like, will you tell them? I'm like,
No,
bad things will happen.
my job.
So here's the thing, though. You can't train your way out of this problem, right? Like this is an evergreen problem where like you hire a new person. You can't train your way out of. I'll just put it to you this way: you can't train your way out of stupid. You can become more intelligent, but stupid things are still going to happen. I, as a security professional, still to this day get caught by the occasional phishing link, because the more they're really, some of them are really sophisticated, and you're just like, oh yeah, and then you're sitting in the middle of typing and you're like, well, wait a minute, I clicked a link to get here, maybe I'll just like go to the real place, log in, and see if this, which is why like I don't trust those things regardless. But so this is what I was going to bring up, where if you can't train your way out of it because you can't trust people to do the training instead of just clicking through and treating it as a thing, how do you solve it? And the only way to solve it is you end up having this situation where workplaces have to treat their employees like potential criminals. And it's really dangerous for morale. It's really dangerous for morale. It's a very hard problem.
So to this point, I got to wrap into where this has been an age-old question and answer, talking about how much training or user awareness do we need to go through and do versus how much detection do we need to have in place. And InfoSec has been warring over this, saying, hey, users are hopeless, forget about them, versus no, we need to educate them. I think we need to have something in the middle to where we still need to have this education so people are aware of this, but they're not going to catch everything. So
this is something I'm going to throw out there, though, is, I'll let Gulo go and then I'll pull in.
So as far as criminal goes, we've always been criminals at work, even before like the computer side of things. I get assigned an employee number. I have X amount of special clothing that I have to wear to work. I have to have a photo ID badge, and I'm only allowed in certain areas. And I have specific times that I can take a break, go to lunch, play in the yard, those types of things. Work has always been prison.
And there's our clip for today.
Like you're not wrong. Like, okay, I'm with you. I'm with you on this. And with the comment that created the stream in the first place was the fact that, for Gulo was saying that we don't have a work shortage or we don't have a labor shortage. We have a well-paid labor shortage, right? In the sense that, and that's how we started talking about insider threats, where I was just like, what's really funny is, you have that overnight cashier that's working at a 7-Eleven or an overnight gas attendant. There is like, if they're being paid $7.50 an hour in 2020, what is it, 2 now? Yeah, 2022. If they're being paid $7.50 an hour, just about anyone could walk in with 15 grand in cash and get them to just give you the keys and leave, right? Because they're so underpaid that 15 grand is a life-changing amount of money. And that is paltry compared to what organizations out there have access to. Like it's a drop in an ocean of money. Yeah, so like that's why when people are like, oh, we have insider threats, part of that is like, well, part of addressing insider threats is ensuring that your people are sufficiently compensated so that they will actually protect your data instead of compromising it for a paltry amount of money.
Mm-hmm. I think the where I think the one of the concepts came in was saying during a penetration like actually this ties well into where you were talking about clicking on phishing. Like often in security, we get wrapped up into here are the threats that you need to be worried about. You need to be worried about an unauthorized, unauthenticated user hitting your external network and finding an entry in. We're mostly on that side of things. The way in is, credential stuffing, guessing a password, which ultimately leads you into an account which doesn't show any indicators of compromise until you start doing weird things with it. Effectively, not an insider threat, still terrifying. The piece which we were talking about is like, that's expected. When have you ever heard of a penetration tester just like walking into the cleaning staff and handing them $5,000 and saying, hey, let me in the building for 5 minutes, or go plug this into a computer and we'll never talk again? Like, that is terrifying. The other piece I was going to mention is you had said even like you fall for phishing attacks once in a while, or phishing like the simulations and whatnot. And this is where I think we need to start switching our thinking, especially when it comes to like phishing and how to do phishing assessments and things like that, because the goal of phishing assessments is not to get someone to click. You can absolutely get someone to click any link. It doesn't matter at what level, because that person, they're not stupid. They're just trained to do their job. If their only job is to facilitate transactions, to do wire transfers, if you get into the president's account, like legitimately in their account, and just copy an email and change the numbers around, they're going to follow it. Effectively, it's a spearfish. They're going to follow it. You almost have to get users to the point where they get phished so often. You fill their inbox with so much crap, they start just pushing away everything that isn't their like day-to-day essential job. But this is where, again, they're not stupid. They're just trained in such a way where it's like they're just trying to get their job done. That is their only goal in life, is to get their, sorry, maybe not their only job in life, but is to get their job done. So this is where I think we have this constant pendulum shift between educate the users, put technical controls in place to catch and prevent them.
So when we're talking about insider threats again too, we quickly covered, okay, it could be the current employees. It can also be if you're in a corporation, or if you're still in a building, or you're going back to a building now, the whole evil maid attack, or the cleaning crew, the janitors, anybody with physical access to the location, to the server rooms, or whatever else. It could just be to the front office. It doesn't even have to be all the way inside the building. If you could get behind the desk, much like the hackers scene, to where serial killer's underneath the desk fiddling with the phone and he installed something, it was at the front door, right?
Mm-hmm. The best part about that movie is it just continues to be incredibly accurate, despite being a giant meme. Like, it's so amazing.
So there are accidental things too. This is slightly off topic, but I once had a UPS that was for my server room. It was a big, like 30 or 50 kVA UPS, and it was about 3 feet away from the entrance to the building. And I posed the question to my boss and to the engineers of the UPS of, if the sprinkler system went off in the server room and the floor became soaked with water, the fire alarms went off. If people were trying to exit the building, would that UPS turn into a giant bug zapper for humans? And would there just be a pile of dead smoking bodies at the front door?
And sounds like your
he was just
plan.
He's just like, yes, but how is that different than any other day?
Well, exactly. And when I called the company, the engineers were like, yeah, we never thought of that before. You should probably find some way of grounding that out so it doesn't happen. I mean, there's all kinds of accidental things that can happen. You have motion detectors on your doors that if you walk past, it'll unlock the door and somebody could be standing behind that door waiting to come in. You have circuit breakers. You have cleaning crews. I've had cleaning crews come in and unplug servers before because they were trying to save power. And that was like 3 months of, why is this going offline at this time every single night?
Let's split the conversation here, though, because I think you're bringing up a good point, which is at a certain point we could call all of these things insider threats, whether it's phishing, social engineering, bribery, all of these things can be considered insider threats. So I want to at least define the term a little bit of maybe into a couple different categories and then talk about, okay, like how can you prevent these things or what detection mechanisms are there? So anyone want to take a wager at like, or throwing out definition for an insider threat? What is it?
Insider threat is
we're 20 minutes in. We should probably define the term.
Insider threat is anything or everything, whatever it is that has any access whatsoever, whether it's physical or virtual access to any of your systems, is an insider threat. My toaster now can gain an IP address. It needs to be segregated off. My TV, I work from home. I don't trust my company that I work for I trust them that they're not going to scan my network for things because I don't think they know how to. I don't trust them because I don't think they have the security in place to prevent other people from cracking into their network to scan my network. So I segregate those things out.
So I'll be even more explicit because we can talk about devices, but I don't think that's what we're really here to talk about. An insider threat is a person who has some amount of access, whether physical, technological, or otherwise, that is a target or is an avenue for an outsider threat to gain access into your networks or building or what have you. So it is a person who you trust in some form, not a piece of technology, right? Because you could say, oh, that person has an account on this, and you can say that account is an insider threat. No. That person is the insider threat. That person has an account. If that person sets every account that they have everywhere with the same password, that person is the insider threat, and because they're using bad policy, not the account with a bad password. The account with a bad password is, that's an artifact.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I think to add to that is it is a person, whether knowingly or unknowingly, can be used as an avenue, as an attack to the rest of the network. So whether it's knowingly, they're doing it themselves, or they're being manipulated into it. Gator?
So I think it's a valid point that Gulo did bring up. You also have insider devices, right? So yes, tip. So sorry, apparently I started getting reverb. When it comes to both insider threat, when it comes to a person or devices on your network, when we're going through the definition, anything that could go through and cause damage or harm to your organization, your network, to your work. And this can be, like you guys have also said, wittingly, unwittingly, whether this is on purpose, because some people may go through and accidentally unplug something. Or, I don't know, trying to spoof a MAC address.
I would say, though, for the sake of this discussion, I think it is always a person. Like, it is an insider threat is a person. Gulo?
Yeah, I can agree with that. We can narrow this down for the specific discussion. The only part I would disagree with is the term avenue. It's anyone that has access or could have access virtually or physically, because the avenue is immaterial. It's anyone we've mentioned the cleaning crews. We've talked about CEOs. How hard is it for us to do, especially Silk, to do privilege escalation? Just because they don't have access to something now doesn't mean you can't gain access by using them as a foothold. So it's anyone or everyone that has any type of access, virtually or physically, is an insider threat, or could be an insider threat, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're defining insider threat as people, this is going to be a fun question. What creates insider threats, right? If it is people, what gets an insider threat to do something? And one of the things that I think that we talked about, which is like if you underpay someone, that you're creating an opportunity for an external threat to turn them into an insider threat by just giving them money, right? And so in that case, like I would say there's a very large sphere of things that companies do and can do that create opportunities for insider threats, and they are all they're all classified under the umbrella term inhumane practices.
So
Underpaying people is one example of that.
Well, it's also
No,
hold on though, because I would also argue, and then I'll hand it to Gulo, I promise. I think it's also transient workforce. Is even if you're paying them well, if someone else is paying them better, there's also opportunity of them just like grabbing stuff and moving on with it. Gulo, and then I'll
Well,
pull it
not just
back.
that, but
So-
also treating them better, right? So
Yep.
I agree with Silk in that point. If someone came to me and said, and I'm paid, okay, I'm not paid very well, but I'm paid better than most. I'm just not paid well for the work that I do. If someone came to me and was like, here's $5 million, I want access to everything you have access to. There's some amount of money that anyone could be bought. Now, me preferentially, I don't care about money. So if someone offered me $5 million, I'm not going to take the $5 million just to give them access. I'm going to take the $5 million to give them access because I'm curious what they're going to do, and I'm going to stalk the crap out of them.
Well, hold on though, because I think that's at a certain point, this just boils down to like this is how companies look at risk. They go, how much, like your $5 million scenario, like what is the possible profit margin they could get off of your access? Is it more than 5 million? If it's not, then take the 5 million and run, because you can grab that 5 million, you can split it with the company and go, okay, here's your 2.5, here's my 2.5. Like we made more money than whatever they're going to steal us anyway. Like ultimately, that's a good business decision.
this is actually really funny because I was as Gulo was talking, I was saying like, at what point of like they're offering you $5 million for access to a company's data, right? At what point do you walk up to the company and just go like, hey, someone's offering me $5 million to give unfettered access to the data? Are we breaking the law by allowing them access to the data? And if not, can we just make $5 million together?
Are we
Small
just now
finance fee, right?
selling the company?
Yeah,
Exactly, right?
Does this become like the open source thing? Is this the watering hole thing where somebody goes up to Log4j maintainers and be like, here's $5 million. I want you to put this line of code in there. And are they going to really balk at that? Or are they going to be like, cool, and then move on with their lives? There's a price on everything was my point. You can buy anyone at any point in time. I mean, I'm sure that I have a price where I would give access and my curiosity would wane, but that's going to be a really big number.
Like $1 billion.
Wait, hold on. But I think the question is I'm hesitant to say this, is that anything has a price, but the question is what are you willing to do for like $20 at DEF CON? Just theoretically.
We've talked about this. We're all hookers. It's fine.
Okay.
Gulo will do well. That's the thing. It's just like if you ask Gulo what he would do for $20 at DEF CON, anything Gulo would do for $20, he would do for free. Right?
Oh.
I mean, it's
the $20 is
curiosity.
just gravy.
So, like I said, $5 million, I would give them access, but I would want to sit back and see what they're actually doing. It's the curiosity. Am I brave enough to do it? Is it something that would be super fun? Is it something I'm going to enjoy? Those are all things that I take into account. The money's kind of immaterial. It's what is the life experience that I'm going to get from doing this?
So
This conversation can be pulled so many different ways right now.
Yeah.
When I'm going to try to go down the route of saying, okay, so we've got money as being one of the things that could happen to people to get the insider threat and give them access. Blackmail is another big one, right? If there's something that you've done in the past that, I mean, how much of our data has been leaked out online between Blue Cross Blue Shield, Equifax, and then the OPM breach? That's a lot of data out there and a lot of contact information. And whether it's medical, whether it's financial, or whether it's wherever you've lived in the past however many years, that's another way for somebody to go through and try to blackmail you to get access to inside the company.
If Gowrie has taught me nothing else, and if you get nothing else from social media or anything like that, you cannot be blackmailed if you're proud of it.
Hashtag true story.
Yep.
That's fine for most people. There are other people who say, that dirty pic that I sent versus whatever else. Yeah, please use Signal, use Tor.
Please do not send your images over Tor. Oh gosh, it's a terrible idea. We have discussed this numerous times.
My naked ass has been on the 10 o'clock news more than once. It doesn't matter what photos I send out.
And this is the second time demonetized within the stream.
Hey, I said dirty pics. Come on now.
All right, I'll spin this back. It's like going back to again, bribery and things like that is we start looking into it. Like, okay, how do you treat this? Because Gulo brought up such a funny point because it was so reversed, which is he is scared because he's a security paranoid individual, like most of us are, of a company who has access to the company computer on his network, and he's worried about the rest of his network. Or from a company's perspective, they're terrified that we have moved to this BYOD, this bring your own device type system. And it started with laptops and systems. Now it's turned into phones. And this is what's terrifying to me with phones being BYOD. They're full-blown operating systems. The iOS, probably not as much. Those are a lot of cool things you can do with. Android is full-blown Linux. You can run full-blown Python on it. Full-blown, there's so many languages that just run on Android. And it can be a full-blown attack platform to pivot into the VPN. Now, this starts going in more the technical side of things, but at what point, and this is, okay, here, I'll pull it over to another point. Plausible deniability. This is what's terrifying as individuals who have this much access. At what point is it they were malicious, they were an insider threat, it was them doing it purposefully, versus I'm crying wolf and oh no, someone just took advantage and hacked into my system and is doing all of these things. That's a whole nother aspect of this that we have to really consider is how do you defend against this whole aspect of crying up some, it was hackers got in, they did cool things, it was totally them and not me just grabbing a bunch of data.
So if you want a concrete example of this or a concrete answer to this, all you have to do is look at it, how hard it has been for the federal government to convict people of the actual charge of espionage, right? People who commit actual espionage, there's famous cases out there. People who have committed actual espionage, they get charged with espionage. For the people who are on the fringes of being able to claim deniability and stuff like that, they're charged with other things. And that's because that intent is actually really difficult to prove. You need a relatively concrete paper trail.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'll hand it off.
So my take was something I said earlier. If I'm an insider threat, it's either I'm plausibly denying it because I didn't know and I was just being an idiot, or I don't think a jury of my peers will ever convict me because when I describe what happened and why I did it, any rational person will agree with me.
Yeah, but the problem is, Gulo, you don't have any peers. So can you even be tried?
You literally stand a head above everyone else. Come on, man.
For anyone who doesn't know, Gulo is 7 foot tall. He's just that, and he has fuzzy leg warmers. You know him at DEF CON when he usually has about another 1.5 foot mohawk above him. Absolutely
true
fantastic. So we've covered a couple of different things. Where else do we want to go with this conversation? Because I think there's a couple other logical places we can jump.
Insider threats are real threats.
What was that, Gator?
I was going to say insider threats are real threats. And the problem is that if you get down the route of being so tyrannical in your company that it makes it unbearable for your employees because you're so scared about the insider threat, that's not a healthy environment to be working in. So you've got to have that balance to make sure that you're able to detect when this is happening. Again, you got to do your homework by knowing where your critical information is, where your valuable information is, and then making sure that you've got logs and flags to throw up when people are touching it, whether it's authorized or unauthorized.
So this comes back to risk assessments, and
Yes.
this goes into, if I don't know why we're picking on cleaning crew. I blame Silk. I really hate this side of it, but if I were to go pay a cleaning crew $5,000 to give me access to the building, the cleaning crew is going to give me access to the building because they want to make that money, which is fine. I totally get that. But the risk assessment is, do we pay the cleaning crew so poorly that any amount of money they'll give access to the building, or do we pay them so much money that they would never do that and we trust them and we love them? It comes back to a risk assessment. If somebody paid the cleaning crew $5,000 and they gave me access to the building, could that person do $5,000 worth of damage? If so, would it behoove of me to pay my cleaning crew that much more money per month, per week, per day for them to not give somebody access, because it would cost more money in that access than what it would for me to actually pay them a living wage? And that comes back to the risk assessment. Does the amount of money that I pay my employees actually impact how much money I would lose if those employees turned against me for whatever reason?
See,
So
here's the
this is-
part of this though. Oh, go on, Gary.
I was gonna say this actually turns like the security policy assessors and creators, and B, the managers who decide how much money to pay people. It turns these two people into like meta insider threats, where if they make if they make a bad decision, they create insider threats. So they themselves are the insider threat, right? We're going full meta here.
Like, well, this is kind of like a couple points on that. Like, again, let's continue beating up on the cleaning crew. Like, what's so interesting about these contracts, though, is the actual people doing the cleaning are not the ones getting paid. It's like the major company is not paying them directly. They're paying another third-party vendor who's now paying them. So what do? Review all the contracts and be like, well, how much are you actually paying your people? Like, that...
Yes.
That becomes a really you think, and then the other piece of this though is you're now basing salaries based on how much they can damage the company. Like, let's forget about skill set right here. Let's just go, how much can you damage the company? That's how much you're willing to pay. So like the guard at the bank, like again, bad example on that one, but like that seems insane to me. Like the legitimately going, how much damage can they cause? I want to pay them more than how much damage they can cause.
No, it's not the only factor. It's a factor. But go ahead, Gula.
Gula's going to blow up.
I think I got it. I think I know why CEOs make so much ridiculous amounts of money. They can cause that amount of damage to the company, so we're paying them not to screw over the company they're running.
We now understand capitalism. Done.
No, but so
go
there was kind of a good example of an insider threat. I think it was at Verizon. This was several years ago, and it was a great story of they had a programmer there that was he was a mediocre programmer, and he was doing a phenomenal job. There was just some day that the amount of skill and what he was producing was better than everyone else around him. And what happened is they're like, what's going on? And when they looked at the logs, they noticed that he was working nights, even though he was in the office all day long. All of his access was from the nights, and it was coming from China. He had outsourced his job to Chinese programmers, and he sat there all day long, like scrolling Facebook and eBay and whatever else, not doing anything. And then at night, he had this team of Chinese programmers that were doing his job for him for a pittance for what he was actually making. And that was kind of an insider threat because he gave him his VPN keys, all of his access, everything else, but they were doing his job for him.
Yeah,
So it gets worse than that.
Yeah.
Here's the story with it. They also had the RSA token to where they mailed one to one programmer, and then they had a live webcam set up looking at the other one, so they would see when the numbers roll over. They would just have to log in and grab the latest. So
Dude,
it was just
amazing.
Yeah, it was incredible.
That's really, it's funny. Like as stupid as that sounds and as simple as that is, like that's incredibly sophisticated for someone to just be like, "Oh, why are we gonna do some crazy RSA cracking thing? Why don't we just point a camera at it?" That's really it. It feels like common sense, but it probably would take me a while to arrive at that resolution, despite being in the security industry, right? I'd just be like, "Oh, that's a really elegant solution to a to a stupid problem."
I'm smiling at this one right now because I have seen this a remarkable number of times in production environments because they need to use certain systems need shared accounts, so they do like secure webcam feeds and things like that to be able to trigger it. The weirdest one is I've seen where you send commands to the system and then it texts you a picture of it where it was all like Twilio API-ified, which I thought was just kind of amazing. But also like, all right, I'm going to say something which I find the moment I never heard of the story. And now I'm noticing it's like Gator has posted the link to it. Like, see, am I the only one whose mind immediately went to this individual? Like if he worked at my company, this individual is getting a manager role because now I can outsource because he was the best coder. He was the best coder. So ultimately it means all my other coders are not doing as good of a job as him, and he outsourced it. So he's somehow profitable with how much I'm paying him for outsourcing his work. So wouldn't it make sense to make him the manager and then expand the workforce?
That was the general consensus of tech workers of pay that man more money and turn him into a manager because he's got skills. Verizon fired him, which I understand why they fired him, but it was one of those things that what he was doing was kind of brilliant. But you also brought up a good point of the setting up the secure webcam for like an RSA key, when you have so much security that it actually impacts productivity and annoys the crap out of your workers, they're going to do whatever they can to subvert the security so that they can do their jobs and make their lives easier. So you have to strike a balance. Once again, it becomes a risk assessment of, if it's so complex and annoying that your workers are like, screw this, I'm going to hook up a webcam to a general RSA key, then you've made things so complex that you can't actually secure anything anymore.
So Cameron Batko says the Capital One Bank data breach was done by a disgruntled fired insider from AWS. This is really fascinating because if I understand the story correctly, which I'm not familiar with this one in particular, it was not somebody at Capital One. It was somebody at AWS who caused a breach of Capital One's data. Is that considered an insider threat to Capital One, or is that considered an insider threat to AWS? It's clearly a threat to Capital One. What could Capital One have done about it if it was not one of their employees? And I think this kind of goes back to like a more simplified way of looking at this is, if I'm a big company paying a cleaning crew contract, the cleaning crew that comes in is not my employees. So are they insider threats or are they external threats? And how do you control them, right?
I think we can define that with insurance. And this is a really crappy example, but if I'm paying a contract cleaning crew company or I'm paying AWS, do they have insurance based off of data breaches? If they have insurance based off of data breaches, then I wouldn't consider them an insider threat. I would consider them a contract company that would reimburse me for whatever damages they caused, versus an insider threat would be, do I fire them? What actions do I take? What money have I specifically lost because I can't regain it by contacting an insurance company?
This one actually, I think, falls more in the line of third-party vendor risk management. And this is where I'll tie it back to what we were talking about with employees moving from one company to another one. And if it was a Capital One employee who was disgruntled and went to AWS and decided to screw over his old company, like at the end of the day, there's a whole part of security called third-party vendor risk management. It's evaluating, and this is where you start evaluating the vendor more than you are their employees. Like, does the vendor have a security policy in place? Are they encrypting data at rest? Oh, they're a technology provider. Here's the extra requirements we need them to follow. Oh, they're a cleaning where they actually have on-site employees. Here's the extra pieces that they need to do. They need to have background checks for all their employees. They need to have this. And then almost every one of these contracts has a non-solicitation clause, which says you cannot hire our employees, and any of your employees who work here cannot go to another competitor. Like, those anti-solicitation clauses are to stop specifically someone like grabbing all their notes on the way out, leaving, going to a competitor, dropping all their notes on the table, and then leveraging those as like that privileged access. The other thing most employees sign, so like if you come and you're working at this company and then you work at this one, something that you sign as part of your employee agreement is, I did not bring anything from my previous employer. I won't use any privileged information. I won't use any confidential information. I won't use any of the information I gained from them to do this. Super important for coders, because any code you type is privileged IP owned by this company, and if you reuse that code over here, all of a sudden the prior employer now has like a claim on that code. So like transient employees, going back to the third party, it all comes down to like third party vendor risk management, where you're starting to look at like, here is the company, which like AWS is our third party. Does that make sense, Gulo? Or did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
That makes sense. I agree with. So I sign NDAs all over the place. I work in random industries. I've been in the same industry for like 7 years now, and I've bounced between a couple of different companies, and I contract out. The part that always confuses me is, yes, I'm doing VR stuff. Yes, I have a very specific skill set, but the knowledge that I gain at one company is knowledge that I take to the next company, and I will use that knowledge. I won't use their policies. I won't use their procedures. I won't just like hard copy and paste, but it's knowledge that I've gained. And unless I leave the industry that I'm currently in to go to a separate industry for X amount of years, then come back, that's not feasible to do. As far as coding goes, I reuse functions that I wrote for a company 10 years ago for how I handle input validation into a bash script. I wrote that so long ago at a company, but it has nothing specifically to do with what that company needed or what that company required, like proprietary wise. It was a generalized function. And I will admit, I use those all over the place, everywhere, because if I was to rewrite it from memory, it's going to look almost identical. So
well, yeah,
it doesn't matter.
It's very important to disclaim what you're stating here. There's a difference between, and I'll use this very clearly, there's a difference between you writing a solution to a problem for one company and then taking that solution to another company and utilizing the same code, right? Same exact thing, and using code snippets that do something like parse and validate data, unless your job was to write a custom parsing and validation system for something that isn't a general problem, right? Like, there's a huge gray area, and oftentimes it gets labeled as like, you know, if I'm just trying to print a float to the screen, that code's going to look the same no matter where you go, right? It's the same problem with checking licenses on code, right? Where how do you prove that this printf function isn't a copy and paste from, you know, the GPL printf function? It's like, they're going to look the same, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same thing where, like, you know, I work in virtualization. If I was told by my employer that, you know, I can never use my virtualization, you know, knowledge ever again, I'd be like, how do you deal with the fact that there are publications out there that just state, here's how you build a hypervisor? In fact, it's in the Intel developers manual. Like, you can't prevent me from using that knowledge again. You can prevent me from taking your IP and even re-implementing your IP with the knowledge I've gained from your IP. Like, that is different. And you get into legal weird areas where you have non-competes, and, you know, this is not the stream for that, right? Like, there is an insider threat there where you have somebody who leaves a company with knowledge, but there's an explicit intent there Are you leaving with knowledge that you gained, or are you leaving with actual discrete artifacts that you produced for the company, right? Are you leaving with code that they own? Like, that's the difference.
There's two pieces here, which you bring up a good point, but I think it's worth touching on. First, that idea of the right to work. Like there's different states which are right to work and things like that, grabbing your knowledge and things like that. Ultimately, like, you can't separate yourself from the knowledge you've gained. So all of this really comes down to like grabbing the exact code or duplicating code, and how most, like, if you sum up almost all of law, it comes down to what is the damages. Like, court case settles, all of that, you get sued and all of that, whatever. At the end of the day, they're going to say, when you copied that code over to this other company, what is the damage? What is the financial impact of you copying that code? And if it's like a printf function or something like that, they're going to be like, nope, there is none, because it was publicly available here. It was publicly available here. So like, ultimately, almost everything when it comes to hacking and legal and everything like that comes down to what is the damages caused, and that's where they assess fines.
Yeah, you don't have. So I don't entirely agree with that statement based on my knowledge, and not a lawyer, but based on my knowledge of law.
Generally speaking, for a giant blanket statement,
there's two things. One is you have to have damages to even have standing in a court, period. So you're correct on that statement. However, damages can include violation of copyright or trademark, and that is a threat to you retaining both your copyright and trademark.
Yep.
Right. So if you don't enforce it, you can lose the trademark, even if there's no financial damages. So damages does not necessarily mean financial.
Yeah.
Right.
That's all I want to say.
Everything I know about patent, and I'll agree with that. I'll even further it, is everything patents and whatnot are like getting a patent on a piece of technology. Your patent is only worth what you're willing to fight to defend it against other ones. So you can own a generic patent, but if you never go after it, it's not really worth a whole lot.
So like tying this back in, yeah, I agree. Tying this back in, how does this relate to insider threats? We're talking about this in terms of transient workforce. Is someone who leaves your company sufficiently gruntled? They're not disgruntled, so they're sufficiently gruntled, and they went to another place, but they're taking knowledge they took with them. Does that constitute an insider threat? And that is a whole philosophical argument. I think that it's really hard to get down into the weeds on that one.
I would actually just say malicious intent. Like, what is the intent? If you're leaving, it sounds so dirty. I am sufficiently gruntled. I'm not disgruntled. I'm just gruntled. But I think it comes down to, like, what is the intent? Is it malicious intent? And I think oftentimes the thing, like, a lot of this security is, was it done maliciously or not maliciously? So even like an insider threat, like phishing or anything like that, was it clicked on maliciously, or was it clicked on without thinking? Like, ultimately, like, I would agree, anyone can be an insider threat. But I think where I moved my definition is with malicious intent. Are you doing this with malicious intent or not?
And this is why, and Gator's going to love me on this one. This is why.
Oh, go ahead.
All software should be free and open source.
So I will
because then
say,
you don't have this problem.
So you can still have insider threat because of the watering hole issues, right? I love the solution there, Gallery. You're absolutely right. And it's the reason why I ended up changing careers in the fields that I was in, because I was tired of not being able to talk about what I was doing for work or being able to share that. And I got to go to the opposite side of the scale, to where I get to share about almost everything that I get to do for work, which is awesome. It has different use cases for different people. You still have companies and you still have other individuals that don't want information leaked online or put online, because that is their special sauce, right? So it's finding that right balance. We're all insider threats, whether wittingly or not, because we have that potential. But yeah, I'd say go open source and everything's fine.
I agree with Gator on that one. I don't think that malicious intent comes into play for insider threats, because if anyone could be an insider threat, it's they click on some email, whether or not they mean to or they do it maliciously, they are still an insider threat, because as a company, they are a threat to the company, whether or not they meant to do it. Now, yes, there are malicious people out there, and there are different things that you can do to mitigate those, but you have to try to mitigate to all levels of the company. When I've done pen testing before for banks, and pen testing for banks, I've had to physically access banks. But inside that pen testing, inside the contracts, I was never allowed to touch the vaults. I have begged and begged the project managers and the leads on those contracts to let me touch the vault because I'm pretty sure I can get in and I want to try. But they won't let me because it's in the contract. They're like, no, get away from the vault, put the drill down. We're not licensed to do that. You're going to go to jail. Go, stop it. And so at that point in time, I was an insider threat. Would I have drilled into the vault? Probably not. I would have tried the whole stethoscope thing and tried to spin. Yeah, I would have tried all kinds of things without damaging the vault. I'm pretty sure I may have gotten into one or two of them, maybe. But I was the insider threat. And if you ever take me on a pen test, you need to make sure that my curiosity doesn't beat out what's actually in the contract because, well, I'm evil that way.
In scope.
No, you're not evil. Not evil. Chaotic neutral. Like true neutral, but chaotic neutral.
So, something
you're
actually,
just in it for the chaos.
Something you bring up is really interesting. So someone I want to actually bring onto the stream at one point is Noob. His handle is Das Nubus. So Noob, I've known him a really long time. He graduated with biometric security, and now he designs physical security systems. And something which is really interesting when it comes to banks. Now, what's interesting is a lot of his work, weirdly enough, is for like the grow industry. And the main reason why is because they end up having to be their own banks because like they can't put money in, and there's a whole nother thing within the FDIC. But when he's designing physical security systems, what tends to happen with where they're holding their own money, they hire two different companies to do their physical security. One does the outer layer of all their physical security, their cameras, their key cards, and everything like that. And then a separate company does the camera system, which happens around the vault, so that neither company has all the access, or if those companies are breached, neither company gets all the blueprints to know where all the cameras are, where to bypass coverage. It was like one of those concepts he brought up where I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. It's more expensive, but I'm guessing banks probably do something similar too, where they have one security company do the outside and one do the inside. And even at large enterprises, I've seen this within designs for like networks, especially when it comes to like SCIFs or like your segmentation, your cardholder data. The big one is like money movement system. So if you work at a giant hedge fund, they do a lot of the transactions internally before having those like match up at the end of the day. Those systems are done the same way. They're designed by a whole different group of software engineers who work on that system, and then other people build the layers and the third parties around it.
That's the Batman paradox.
What's the Batman paradox?
When he's building his Batcave, he has to kill off all of his contractors, but he has to continually find new contractors because everything has to be a secret, and he can only have them build one specific thing at a time.
Yeah. But this is why, like, you can argue like good security is, we can argue what good security means, but good security is extraordinarily expensive. Right, if you want to design a properly secure facility and system, it is very expensive because you have to take a lot of these things into account. Where you think you're just like, oh, you set it up and you have one network. It's like, no. You have many networks, to the extent where like you could have 10 people that work for your company and they work on 20 different networks.
Yeah. True story.
Well, and then you add complexity in any one of these systems. This is where security flaws come into place. This is why you look at like a system like OpenBSD. It's great. It's secure. It does really great things, but it also is not nearly as capable of other operating systems out there because they designed it to be secure.
So, and it all comes back, once again, I harp on risk assessment all the time, and I need to find better things to talk about. But like, I'm designing my own house now. I'm trying to build my own house, and I'm designing it. And I'm not necessarily designing the house to prevent people from coming in. I'm more designing it for like the apocalypse, earthquakes, hurricanes, those types of things. And rather than building standard studs that everyone builds their houses out of, I've actually bought a crap ton of popsicle sticks, and I'm going to start building models of honeycomb designs and more igloo shapes that actually prevent some of these natural disasters or protect from some of these natural disasters. And that's where my risk comes in at is if someone breaks into my house and I'm home, they're going to have a bad day. If they break into my house and I'm not home, then they're eventually going to have a bad day because I will find them. But I'm not concerned about those people. I'm more concerned about what happens around me: floods, earthquakes, fires, those types of things.
So
Gulo has a specific set of skills, and he's willing to use them.
We're bumping up against the hour, but I think the spot which is a good place to end is how do you defend against these things? Because that's a whole nother conversation. But I think let's split it into two categories. What policies, procedures, like what can you do as a company to help prevent these things? And then what technological advancements or technological defenses are typically used? So I'll start with the technological ones because I think those are probably a little bit more interesting, or at least to me. One of the biggest ones I've seen is talking about flow, like looking at this server communicates with this server. This user typically only is online at these times, and it almost becomes down to like behavioral analysis of your employees. What times are they on there? What times are they active? What systems do they normally touch? What data do they typically touch? And you start building this model, and when there's deviations from that, then you start raising flags. Now, something which kind of comes in, like what software do they run? Now it comes into this whole other level of APT that goes on, like the living off the land exploiting, where they're using the tools and align, like they actually map that information out, and then the attacker follows that internally. But a lot of the defenses I've seen technically are all built off of flow and typical behavior. What other ones have you guys seen?
Technologically, it's almost always going to be some form of anomaly detection system that you've described, right? Any kind of access controls, the system, like even just like badging into a facility. A lot of people think badging in is like a huge hassle. It's literally there. It's not. It's there for two reasons. It's there to know who's in the building when a fire happens, and two, to detect when people are showing up late, and to really just prevent people from showing up late, because that's how you determine when people are doing something, nefarious in theory, unless people have a reason there to be late. Those are the two reasons there. So like that is an example of an anomaly detection system. Almost everything technological in this manner is going to fall somewhere along that line. You can get more complicated and say like, I'm going to monitor my network. You're still doing the same thing. You got to figure out what's normal and then find out what's not normal. So technologically, we just described captures almost the whole thing.
I completely agree there. When it comes to practical hands-on application of doing this, there's network detection intrusion. But honestly, when it comes to a Linux box, right, I'm going to talk to my strength, which is turn on AIDE, which is AIDE, which goes through and it logs whenever a person logs in. You can turn up that monitoring to where every time that there's a file modification, depending on your threat model, and if you've done your job with the risk assessment, you can find out if copying files off to a thumb drive is an issue. Turn on that logging feature to where you can go back and check that, and then actually make sure that you're checking the logs versus just turning them on, right? There have been times in my past jobs to where I've had to go through and either make sure that we had the logs turned on because there was literal insider threats that were going on to where somebody was doing time card fraud. And they were saying to one boss they were in one location and the other boss that they were in the other location. And the only way that we were able to pull that information was by going back to the logs. When they log in, what files did they modify and what did they log out? So actually turning on the logs, because I know there's no proof if there's no logs. That's a problem. Go turn on your logging system. In some situations, you need to turn it up too.
IDS, IPS, so intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, you need to have a baseline of what your network is and you segregate things. I don't use I don't use the same account for every single server that I connect to. I have admin accounts per server types that I use to connect to those. So if I ever have so the user on my computer is not the admin of my computer. It does not have admin rights. I have to switch over and use a different user to have admin rights on my local machine. And that admin user I have a different admin user for this server type. I have a different admin user for this server type. And that way I'm segregating things out. So if you pop my box, the only thing that you'll get access to is my box. You won't have access to the rest of my network. You won't have access to my servers. If you pop one of my server classes, like a Perforce server, if you pop my Perforce server, then yes, you'll have access to all of the Perforce servers, but you won't have access to my file servers, to my Active Directory, to any of that stuff without popping each and every one of those. I segregate all of those different networks, different credentials, different IDS, IPS, different baselines, everything, because they all have different footprints. You have to figure out what that baseline is, though.
Yeah, there's two pieces to this. There's the baseline and anomaly detection. The other one is literally just removing capabilities from your systems that are not needed. So if the cleaning crew doesn't need the ability to copy files off of a network, but maybe they have to log in to do their time card, they shouldn't be able to copy files off, which requires a technical control on the system, right? Like that's an example of that. So you have two layers of technical solutions there.
Yep.
Now on the other side, there was minimal access. The other side, you said there was one other thing. What can people do, I guess, to prevent, or what can the company do?
I'll move us there. There was one other one. I have no memory of what it was, though. Coming back is what's the things that you can do for people? Like what we've talked about, like paying them more, third-party vendor risk management, but like the policy and procedures that you could put in place to help insider threat from the people standpoint. And one I'll throw out is just happier employees, making sure you're like at the end of the day, like again, for my company, my people are the most important asset I have at my company. Period. Plain and simple. What are you going to say, Gulo?
As far as that goes, yes, I would rather be a happy employee, and I would rather have happy employees working with me. But on the flip side of it, if they're afraid, are they going to be an insider threat?
Yes.
Beatings will continue until the insider threat is dealt with. This is why we love Gulo. Yeah, I mean, so that comes down to how well can you actually retain employees, though. Like the greatest threat to your company is all of your workers just walking out because you're a terrible company to work for, and then your business ceases to exist, right? Like that's what happens if everyone's afraid of you. Eventually, you will get your comeuppance there.
I want to continue this thread. The thing I just remembered, though, was I want to spin it back to logging, was logging failures. For the love of all that's good and holy, log failures on your network. If your cleaning crew tries to log it directly into the Active Directory server, that should get flagged. Like their failure there should get flagged. And ultimately, like flagging failures in your network is not done nearly as much as it should. You were on a great topic, but I before I forgot, I wanted to interject it. Gowrie.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, like, so that's one. Like, you can make your employees so afraid that they won't ever, betray you, but also they may also just leave. And at which point, if all of your employees leave, you don't have a company. The end, unless it's just you. And if you're terrified of yourself, there are other problems there. You should probably see a psychologist. But no, I think a lot of it comes down to not viewing I take issue. I have a minor issue with the verbiage you used, Silk, which is to not view your employees as assets, but to view them as human beings, which is why large corporations struggle, because at a certain level of I have to manage 250 people or I'm in charge of 1,000 people, it is very difficult to manage the needs of everyone as a single individual at that layer. And at some point, the human being becomes a number. They become an asset. They become a human resource. And that's very difficult.
In my defense there, I was using asset not as an asset in an asset inventory, but they are an asset to the company. Them
Yes,
as
I
an
know what you meant.
individual. Like I'm
I know-
as my defense there. Like
I know what
ultimately,
you
So,
like,
as far as a lot of that stuff goes, I am a huge asset to whatever company I work at because I am very, very good at what I do. And even though what I do is random things, and the reason companies keep me around is because I'm so good at what I do. But they also hate to keep me around because I'm kind of a prick and I just do random things. I play pranks. I'm on a podcast where I say bad things about my companies, and those are things that they frown upon. But because I have a certain level of autonomy and I'm very good at that autonomy, it allows me to do things outside of the norm. Is that a security threat to the companies? Depends on the companies. Like I'm still under contract for some of my pen tests that I've done for large organizations that I can't discuss and I won't discuss until those expire. I usually wait for statute of limitations before I release any information on laws that I've broken because I really don't want to go to jail. I have found ladders in prison, and ladders are bad for gulos.
Kulo's like, I have fuzzy leg warmers. I won't do well in prison. Oh goodness! I want to take a few minutes to respond to comments as they're coming in. Mike, welcome. I'm glad you were able to join us. Junior pen tester, dude. That's awesome. Absolutely fantastic. To answer the question of do other people have channels or is it just mine? I think right now it's mine, but I think Gulo has a secret hidden one. No, that's not true. Gulo has a secret hidden one. Gowrie right above me 100% has a channel, and it is freaking amazing. And he has some cool. He has. All right, I'm going on a tangent here. He has done songs. Right now, the songs have been for like another YouTube channel, but he has like a Porch Pirate song he's doing and releasing it, and he mentioned this. I'm gonna put this on the channel. He said we could play it here, and I'll probably do like a reaction to it. It is freaking amazing. It's a Porch Pirate song though. And
Yeah,
then
I have
Gator.
Go ahead. I was going to say I have a band. We call ourselves Auditory Punishment. So, be forewarned that if you listen, you know what you signed up for. But yeah, no, the YouTube channel is Auditory Punishment. And we've been making songs, a handful of songs for Alpha Investments on YouTube. And then I have a handful of songs that are just kind of in the works.
And they're amazing. And Gator is starting one rather soon, I believe. Right, Gator?
Absolutely. So I've been off of YouTube for a while, getting ready to start that up. The other thing that we've gone through and done with Digital Tinkerer's help is we've been doing the Whole On Network podcast, where we talk about different news weekly, talking about privacy, security, and different vulnerabilities that are out there. So for sysadmins or for folks coming into InfoSec, it's a great way to have a one-stop shop, find out what happened in this last week. It's about an hour-long podcast, so if you're interested, go check it out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to go look.
My secret one is I do streaming on adult websites. So I teach like soldering to single mothers and whoever decides that they actually find my stream. I do that mainly because it's easier not to get banned from one of those. Mainly you just have to have a valid ID and be of age to be on those to stream. So they have really low standards.
With that, as always, this has been Hacker Hangouts. We try and do this every Saturday. Before we close up, one more round. Does anyone have anything else as a closing remark to share, starting with Gator?
Everybody's an insider threat. It's how you treat them afterwards is what really counts. And make sure to go love your hacker family.
I have nothing else, guys. I'm signing off. Thanks for joining us.
Gulo?
As I said in the beginning, STDs are the original insider threat. To mitigate, use condoms.
Or celibacy. Either works.
This is a professional stream. At one point, I'll believe it. My gosh, thank you for joining us on your Saturday morning. Thank you for watching. Thank you for participating. And as always, hack on.